I never imagined how my life would take such a sharp turn when I was a boy, standing knee-deep in the fields behind our modest home. My father always said that hard work was the cornerstone of a good life, and back then, I believed him. Those early years were filled with the smell of fresh soil, the hum of cicadas in the summer, and the comforting rhythm of small-town simplicity. But life isn't kind to naivety. My older brother James was the family's golden child. He was the one everyone admired, the athlete, the charmer, the ambitious one. I, on the other hand, was the boy who spent hours in the shed tinkering with old tools and dreaming of machines that could make life easier for people like us. James would scoff at my ideas, calling them childish. But I was too stubborn to care. Our family business, Miller's Incorporated, was a modest tool manufacturing company started by my grandfather. From the moment I could hold a wrench, I was a part of it. By my 20s, I developed my first invention, a revolutionary drilling mechanism. My patents became the backbone of the company's success, though my contributions were often overshadowed by James' charm and my parents' favoritism toward him. Then came Catherine. She was a whirlwind, beautiful, confident, and utterly captivating. At first, I couldn't believe someone like her would look twice at a guy like me. When we married, I thought I had it all. A loving wife, a thriving career, and 2 wonderful kids. But beneath the surface, fractures were forming. James had always been competitive, but when he began worming his way into Catherine's life, I didn't see the warning signs. The betrayal, when it came, was shattering. It wasn't just the affair. It was the cold calculation of their actions. James had not only stolen my wife, but maneuvered to seize control of the business I'd worked so hard to build. The day I discovered them together was the day I lost everything. My parents, always quick to side with James, dismissed my anger as irrational. They told me to let it go, to focus on the big picture. But how could I when my world had been ripped apart? So I walked away, from Catherine, from the family, from the life I thought I was building. Rebuilding was slow and grueling. I started small, using the royalties from my patents to fund a humble garage where I could work on new projects. It was there, surrounded by tools and grease-streaked walls, that I found the beginnings of peace. And when Marina came into my life, her strength and unwavering support became the foundation for a new kind of happiness. I had grease up to my elbows, the engine of my car demanding all my focus, when the echo of sharp, deliberate footsteps interrupted my thoughts. The distinct scent of a perfume I hadn't smelled in years wafted in before I heard her voice. They're certainly hard to track down. Catherine's tone carried a practiced nonchalance, though I could feel the tension behind her words. I didn't bother looking up. Maybe that's a you problem, I muttered, keeping my focus on the engine. She huffed and strolled around the garage, her heels echoing. So, this is your life now. I glanced at the cluttered bench and oil-streaked floor. What do you expect? A penthouse and a valet. I slammed the hood shut, wiped my hands on a rag, and poured coffee into 2 plastic mugs. Handing her one, I added, I'm no fan of yours, but my mama taught me manners. She took the cup gingerly, her expression unreadable. I was hoping we could talk. Me, you, and James. That stopped me cold. I stared at her. You think I'd sit down with that snake? She sighed. We could have had a civilized conversation. Sorted things out. I laughed bitterly. I was surprised he'd need my boots surgically removed first. She rolled her eyes. You know what he is. We both need to move on. Move on, I shot back. He seduced my wife, stole my company, and left me with nothing. Now you want me to play nice. Her face tightened, but she pressed on. Why stoop to his level if you don't have to? I smirked. Funny coming from you. You seemed fine rolling in the mud with him. Her face went pale. You knew. I nodded, sipping my coffee. Yep. What do you think, that I'd just miss you sneaking around? She fidgeted with her skirt, avoiding my gaze. I didn't come here to fight, she murmured. You just disappeared. No note, no explanation. Leaning back against the car, I crossed my arms. What was there to explain? I left with what little I had and started over. A note wouldn't have changed anything. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. Actually, I thought about leaving one. Dear Catherine, you're a cheating liar. Have a terrible life. Bye. But even that seemed like a waste of paper. Her face twisted with anger. I was never a thief. I barked a laugh. But you didn't deny the rest. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. While I was out drowning my sorrows after James stole my company, you were celebrating with him in my bed. She flinched, but I didn't stop. The memory burned too hot. I pressed on, my voice sharp. When I caught you two, a better man might have thrown punches, maybe called the cops. But me, I just stood there like the ground had vanished beneath me. The rage, bitter and searing, fought against this crushing defeat. My tone steadied, quieter but no less cutting. So I walked away. 2 graves and a life sentence weren't worth it. You weren't worth it. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. Andrew, I didn't let her finish. Yeah. I shot back, my anger rising again. Then why do you and that snake of a brother own the business I built with my blood, sweat, and tears? Her face reddened. I wasn't part of that. It was your parents, Andrew. They said it was best for the company. I let out a bitter laugh. Best for business. No, it was best for their golden boy, your lover. They knew, and they didn't care. Hell, they closed ranks around him while I got shoved aside. She straightened, her posture stiff as she tried to regain control. I didn't come here to rehash the past, she said, her voice clipped. I crossed my arms, keeping my tone calm but cold. No, then why bring it all up? Stirring the pot like I owe you something. You don't get to show up here and drag all that back like nothing happened. So if this isn't about the past, what do you want? Her expression didn't waver, her tone deliberately casual. It's about Logan and Maria. My jaw tightened. What about them? I asked evenly. They miss you. Your kids miss you. They know where to find me, I replied. Her glance around the garage told me that wasn't an option she liked. They need more stability, she pressed. If you can't give them the life they deserve, we need to find another way. I raised an eyebrow. And what's this other way? She hesitated, then rushed out. We were thinking James could adopt them. I froze. What? He's there for them every day. Together, he and I provide what they need, she said, like she was explaining something obvious. This is about the kids, not us. I just want what's best for them. I leaned back against the workbench, narrowing my eyes as I fixed her with a pointed look. What grade did Maria get in math last term? She blinked, caught off guard. What? I folded my arms. You're their mom, right? So close, so involved. I figured you'd know. She blinked, flustered. Their schooling isn't the point. They're doing fine. No, they're smart kids, I said. They'll get by with a little help. That's what I mean, she said quickly. But they'd be better off if James adopted them. He can take over the tedious parts of raising them. Her words hit me like a punch. Tedious. My fists clenched, but I held my ground. You've got some nerve, Catherine. Talking about our kids like they're chores to pass off. Like I'm just a hurdle in your perfect little life with James. Her face tightened, but I didn't care. She could dress it up however she liked, but I wasn't about to hand my kids over to the man who'd already stolen everything else from me. James is a successful, respectable man, she said sharply. He's a fine role model for the kids. And you. Let's face it, you've got nothing. You were nothing. She said it like it was a fact, expecting me to crumble. James wants to help, she continued, her tone firm. Even have a $5,000 check here for you. Take it. Use it to get back on your feet and give your kids a real chance. I leaned back against the workbench, crossing my arms. Generous offer, I said slowly. But I'm happy right here in my garage. It's all I need. I let the words hang, then leaned in slightly. And I'm not selling my kids. Her face flushed with frustration, her hands curling into fists. This isn't about that, she snapped. I'm trying to do what's best for Logan and Maria. You could at least think about their future. I shook my head, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. Their future, huh? Funny how you and James only care about it when it suits you. Their future is better with a father who loves them for who they are, not as props for a perfect little picture. She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand to stop her. Don't bother, Catherine. I know exactly where I stand with you, and that snake you married. Keep your check, and tell James that if he thinks he can buy my kids, he's dead wrong. Just as I turned to pour another cup of coffee, a man in a sleek black suit walked into the garage. He looked wildly out of place among the grease-streaked tools, his polished shoes untouched by dust. I'm Mr. Miller, he said, bowing slightly. The Prime Minister of Japan is on the line, awaiting your response regarding the Osaka project. I shot Catherine a glance. Her face was a mix of confusion and disbelief. Turning back to the suited man, I nodded. Bring it over. He handed me a high-tech phone, and I casually leaned against the workbench. Prime Minister Takahashi, I greeted warmly. It's always a pleasure. I've reviewed the proposal, and while we're aligned, I need to ensure our commitment to sustainability remains firm. That's not negotiable. As the Prime Minister spoke, respectful and accommodating, Catherine's eyes widened. She shifted awkwardly, clearly blindsided. Excellent, I said after a moment. We're in agreement. My team will follow up to finalize the timeline. Thank you for your trust. I look forward to this partnership. I handed the phone back to the suited man, who bowed and left. Before Catherine could process, another man entered, carrying a folder and clipboard. He spoke briskly. Mr. Miller, we need your signature to close the $20 million land purchase. It's set to finalize today. I took the clipboard, skimmed the documents, and signed. Make sure the architects know I want something iconic for the groundbreaking. I said, we're setting the standard. I'm sorry, sir, he replied, leaving with a nod. Catherine stared, her disbelief now complete. You? I didn't know, she stammered. I shrugged, turning back to the workbench. Guess there's a lot you didn't know, Catherine. Life's funny like that. The sharp click of heels echoed through the garage, drawing my attention to the entrance. Catherine turned too, her brow furrowing as the woman stepped in. She was stunning, exuding confidence in a sleek leather jacket and jeans, her athletic moving with effortless grace. Before I could say a word, she strode over, cupped my face, and kissed me, a kiss that declared to the world we were together. Pulling back, she shot Catherine a sharp, amused look, her lips curling into a smirk. Buying a whole garage just to play with your cars. Bit over the top, don't you think? She teased, then turned to Catherine, her expression unimpressed. This is your ex. Didn't you say she was good-looking? This. She waved dismissively. She's like a malnourished Shrek minus the green. Catherine's face flushed with fury. Excuse me? Is this Marina Nika, the MMA champion? How did someone like you trap her? She sputtered, her voice rising. Marina's smirk vanished as she stepped closer, her tone icy. Watch yourself, she said calmly. Normally I'd knock someone out for that, but for Andrew's sake, I'll let it slide this time. Her voice dropped, dark and dangerous. Next time I'll make you regret it, and for the record, he didn't trap me. I chased him. Catherine paled, taking a step back as Marina turned to me, brushing a stray hair from my shoulder. You good, babe? Or should I handle this for you? I chuckled, shaking my head. You've made your point. Let's not scare her too much. Catherine opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked between us, clearly unsure how to respond to the new version of me in the powerhouse at my side. Looking against the desk, I folded my arms and smirked. Shocking, Huh. But honestly, you cheating with my brother. Best thing that ever happened to me. Her expression tightened, but she stayed silent. I pressed on, my tone calm but cutting. The day I caught you, it was pure chance. Came home early, saw you and that maggot in my bed. I didn't even touch him, didn't even touch you. Instead, I went to my parents thinking they'd have my back. My voice hardened as I recalled that night, but when I told them, they didn't care. My dad just sighed and said, "These things happen, don't make a scene." Like it was a business deal. And my mom, she just wrung her hands and said, "It's best to let it go. Let it go," as if it didn't matter. I leaned forward, my voice dropping. I told them I wanted answers, justice, something, and do you know what my father said? My fists clenched as I imitated his dismissive tone. "Don't make this a scandal, son. We have a reputation to protect. Let her go and move on." I laughed bitterly. Move on, like I should just pretend none of it happened. Like my life, my trust, meant nothing to any of you. Catherine's lips parted like she wanted to argue, but my words left her silent. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. The defiance she once had now replaced with guilt and unease. She couldn't meet my gaze. "You don't get to defend them," I said coldly. "You can't tell me it wasn't like that, because it was. They didn't care about me. I was just the son they tolerated. Expendable whenever it suited them, their golden boy could do no wrong." Her shoulders slumped under the weight of my words. "So yeah," I continued, my voice sharp. "The choice was easy. Say and let them destroy me, or leave. Leave you, leave them, leave everything." I leaned in, my bitterness plain. If I'd stayed, nothing would have changed. My brother would have ruined the next woman in my life. And the next. It's what he does. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "I broke the cycle," I said. "Walking away was the best decision I ever made. I don't live in their shadow anymore. I'm free." Her lip quivered as she finally whispered, "I didn't know it hurt you that much." "You didn't think at all, Catherine," I snapped. "Not about me, not about us. You were too busy chasing after him, like everyone else." I leaned back, crossing my arms. I'm done explaining myself. I don't need your understanding. I don't need you. She looked like she might respond but stayed silent, her gaze dropping as the truth settled over her. For the first time, she seemed to understand just how deeply I'd been scared and how little power she had left. I smirked. "The family always thought I was expendable," I said, letting the venom seep into my voice. "The son they could push aside to keep their precious golden boy happy." Her unease flickered, but she stayed quiet. "They made one big mistake," I said, my tone cutting. "They didn't realize I wasn't just the black sheep. I was the smart one, the one who owned the patents that made Miller's Incorporated." Her eyes widened slightly, the realization dawning. "Oh, you didn't know," I continued, relishing the moment. "While you and James were busy playing house, I was working, designing, creating, filing patents under my name. Every wrench, drill, and custom tool that put Miller's on the map. That was me." Catherine's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. I leaned in, my smirk curling. "When I left, I didn't leave empty-handed. I took the licenses with me. And you know what I did?" She shook her head faintly, curiosity betraying her silence. "I started my own company," I said, sitting back with a grin. "And not with a bank loan. My partner had. Let's call them Unconventional Resources. A Mexican dope lord," I said casually, enjoying the shock rippling through her. He needed to clean his money, and I needed capital. Win-win. Her mouth opened and closed as she stammered. "You worked with. He's legitimate now," I said, waving her off. "But back then, his investment built my empire. And now, Miller's Incorporated licenses my tools and pays me royalties every single month." Catherine's face went pale, her hands trembling. You planned all of this," she whispered. I chuckled. Planned? No, I survived. I played the cards I was dealt, and I played them better than anyone ever expected. I leaned back, arms crossed, smirking as Catherine's jaw dropped, her wide eyes brimming with disbelief. She opened her mouth, but no words came. I gave her a moment to absorb what I'd said before twisting the knife. 2 years ago, I pulled all the licenses, I said calmly. Since then, Miller's Inc. has been sinking fast. Her lips trembled. But why? She whispered. I let out a humorless laugh. Why? Because they deserved it. James stole everything. My wife, my dignity, my future. My parents covered for him, sacrificed me to protect their favorite. So I made sure they paid. Her hands gripped the chair, her knuckles white as she pieced it together. With backing from my unconventional partner and the patents I owned, I started poaching their clients, one by one. It wasn't hard. Quality sells itself. And James, he's all talk. The man can't run a business to save his life. I leaned forward, voice dripping with disdain. While he played CEO, I built something real. Every contract they lost came to me. Now Miller's Inc. is drowning in debt, teetering on bankruptcy. James ran it into the ground. Her face twisted with shock and fear. You destroyed them. Your own family, I scoffed. They stopped being my family when they chose him over me. I didn't destroy them. I just gave them the rope James hung himself with. Catherine's voice shook. And you think this makes you better than them? I leaned in, glaring. I don't care what it makes me better, worse. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm free. They lost everything and I'd won. Her eyes filled with unused tears. I didn't know you hated us so much, she whispered. Hate. I shook my head. No, Catherine. Hate takes too much energy. I don't care enough to hate. You, James, my parents, you're nothing to me now. Just ghosts of a life I left behind, I smirked, watching her struggle to process it all. The family always thought I was expendable, I said coolly. The son they could ignore and discard, but they missed one thing. I wasn't just the black sheep. I was the smart one. Every tool that put Miller's on the map. My designs, my patents. Her eyes widened. You? Yep, I said, cutting her off. And when I left, I took the licenses with me. Then I built my own company with some unconventional funding. A retired Mexican dope lord, to be exact. He wanted a clean investment, and I needed capital. Win-win. Catherine paled, her mouth opening and closing. You worked with... Relax, I said, waving her off. It's all legitimate now. And Miller's Inc., they licensed my tools. Every month, they pay me royalties. I leaned back, smirking. While they coddled James, I was building an empire. Mine. Her face was pale, her voice barely audible. You planned all this. No, I said with a bitter chuckle. I survived, played the cards I had, and I played them better. I let the silence linger, watching her squirm before I struck again. Let's talk about the kids. Catherine frowned, her lips twitching as if to argue, but I raised a hand. Don't interrupt, you'll want to hear this. I leaned forward. The school they attend, the one you brag about, gets a hefty annual donation from me. I've been involved in their education, mentoring them, guiding them, watching them excel. Her eyes widened as realization hit, but she stayed silent. That's right, I continued. Every A on their report cards, every project they aced, that was me. I've been there for them every step of the way, ensuring they had what they needed. And you didn't even notice. Her face flushed, a mix of anger and shock, but I pressed on. They trust me, Catherine. They confide in me. Their dreams, fears, struggles, and soon they'll be here with me, permanently. This isn't just about being part of their lives. It's about giving them a home where they truly belong. I leaned back, watching her crumble. You thought I was nothing, just an aunt you could step on. But the aunts survived the storm, and this time, The aunt had the last laugh. Her face went pale, and she gave a faint shake of her head, as if she couldn't or wouldn't accept what I was saying. "You assumed I vanished," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "You thought I abandoned them, just like I walked away from you. But here's the truth. All this time, I've been building something. A connection with them that you can't destroy no matter how hard you try." I stepped closer, my tone hardening. "So go ahead, play your games, cling to whatever illusion of control you think you still have. It won't matter, because soon I'll be the one in charge, and they'll be calling this place home." I let the silence linger, letting my words sink in. For once, the power dynamic had shifted, and she had no moves left to make. "While you were busy making unilateral decisions about their future without me," I said sharply, "I was creating a real future for them. One where they're actually nurtured and guided by someone who knows what they're doing, not left in the hands of people too blinded by their own egos to see the damage they're causing." A bitter laugh escaped as I shook my head, my eyes fixed on her. "Look at yourself, Catherine, all dressed up, playing trophy to James. Does he make you feel important, special?" I didn't give her the chance to answer. I scoffed and waved her off. "Because from where I stand, you're nothing more than a pretty accessory he shows off. A pawn to prop up his fragile ego while he hides the fact that he's barely keeping his head above water." Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing in defiance. But I didn't relent. "Don't look at me like that. James might think he's on top of the world, but the cracks are showing. The debt, it's piling up faster than he can count. The lies they're telling, the IRS and federal investigators, they're circling. It's not a matter of if, it's when. You can't pretend to be a king while living on borrowed time. The collapse is inevitable." Her lips parted, her expression wavering between fury and disbelief, but I pushed forward, cutting her off before she could speak. "You want to know what's really ironic?" I continued, my voice calm but loaded with venom. "Even the banks have been in on this mess. They've known about the shady deals, the misused funds, and the endless deception. Yet they kept giving him money. Do you know why?" I leaned in slightly, letting a cold smile play on my lips. "Because their new majority shareholder has a plan. Every loan, every extension, every so-called favor, it's all part of a strategy. A rope James has been tightening around his own neck." Her eyes widened as realization began to dawn, but I wasn't finished. "And here's the kicker," I added, leaning back with an icy grin. "He's so arrogant, so deluded, that he doesn't even see it coming. While he's strutting around like he's untouchable, the walls are closing in. The storm is already here, and he's oblivious." The silence that followed was heavy. Catherine stared at me, her confidence cracking. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. I leaned closer, locking eyes with her, my voice dropping to a low, steady tone. "And the best part, I'm that majority shareholder. I'm the one pulling every string, orchestrating every downfall. By the time you make it back to that so-called home of yours, there won't be one left. The banks are repossessing it as we speak. That golden dream of yours and James, the family name, the legacy, the prestige, it's all gone, reduced to rubble." I sat back, watching as her composure unraveled. Her lips moved as though she wanted to argue, but no words came. The dread in her wide eyes and restless hands spoke louder than anything she could have said. Surprised, I asked sharply, "You shouldn't be. This didn't happen overnight," I continued. "While James was parading his false success, I was making sure every domino was perfectly aligned. And now they're all falling. There's no stopping it." I let another moment of silence hang in the air before delivering the final blow. "Oh, and about my biased parents. Their home is being repossessed too. Funny, isn't it? How the tables turn. They'll be joining you and James soon enough. It's his problem now to figure out how to fix everything. Or, unless he's arrested." I leaned forward, meeting her gaze head-on. Do you see it now, Catherine? The world has played your little family for fools, and now that same world is turning on James. He won't just lose everything. He'll be scrambling just like the rest of you. So sit back and watch the fireworks. It's about to get very, very ugly." Catherine stood motionless, her face flushed with disbelief as my words hung in the air, sharp and foreboding. "You're bluffing, Andrew," she said, her voice tight with defiance as she fought to steady herself. "This is just another one of your games. You don't have the power you think you do." She threw me a scornful glare, turned sharply, and stormed out of the garage, her heels clicking against the cold concrete. Determined to keep her composure intact, she refused to let me see her falter. She wouldn't give me the satisfaction of victory. Not now, not ever. But as she drove toward her home, the confidence she had clung to began to unravel. The house, her sanctuary, her symbol of success, loomed before her, cold and unfeeling, like a monument to impending defeat. Stepping out of the car, she felt a weight settle on her chest. As she approached the front door, something unusual caught her eye. An official notice pinned to the doorframe. Her pulse quickened as she leaned in to read it. The bold lettering confirmed her worst fear, a repossession notice from the bank. The words blurred as the reality sank in, hitting her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some idle threat. Andrew hadn't been bluffing. It was real. Her breath hitched, and her knees threatened to buckle as she stumbled closer to the door, her mind reeling. The home she had poured her life into, the foundation of all her aspirations, was slipping away. The carefully constructed image she had built for herself was being torn apart by cold, merciless bureaucracy. The world around her seemed to fade. The noise of passing cars, the rustling of nearby trees, all of it fell away as she stood frozen in place, overwhelmed by the enormity of the moment. Her chest heaved as she struggled to steady herself, but the cruel reality refused to relent. A voice broke through her haze. "Ma'am," a man said, his tone detached, professional. The words were another blow to her already crumbling world. "I'm here for the keys." Her eyes darted to him, her expression blank with shock. "The keys," she repeated faintly, her voice trembling as if saying the words aloud would solidify her nightmare. "Yes, Mom. The car is being repossessed as well." "I'll need the keys," he said, holding out his hand. Her stomach churned violently, and her mind swam with disbelief. Repossessed? How had everything unraveled so quickly? Her hand shook as she fumbled through her purse, finally pulling out the keys. They slipped from her trembling grasp into his waiting palm, the sound of the transfer echoing like a death knell. As the man walked away, taking the car with him, Catherine's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the cold concrete driveway. Hot tears streamed down her face, uncontrollable and relentless, as the full weight of her reality bore down on her. Everything, her home, her stability, her carefully maintained image, was gone. The sense of helplessness clawed at her chest, and she instinctively reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed James's number. The phone rang once, twice, and again. Each unanswered ring twisted the knife deeper into her heart than his voicemail picked up, its impersonal tone a cold reminder of how distant he had become. She reeled, desperation overtaking her, only to meet the same void. On the third attempt, the line abruptly disconnected. His phone was off. No answer, no explanation. She sat there in stunned silence, the weight of abandonment settling over her. James wasn't coming to her rescue. No one was. The man with the car was gone. The house was no longer hers, and the last remnants of her world were slipping through her fingers. Sobs racked her body as she knelt on the unforgiving pavement, her mind racing with memories of all she had fought to protect, and all she had now lost. Her cries grew louder, raw, and unfiltered as the reality of her downfall overwhelmed her. Fear, anger, and despair collided, breaking through the fragile wall of composure she had built. Each sob was a painful reminder of how far she had fallen, and how powerless she now was. Through the blur of her tears, the sound of approaching footsteps pierced her despair. She looked up, her tear-streaked face trying to focus on the figures coming toward her. It was James's parents, Richard and Evelyn, walking with somber expressions. Their concern was etched deeply into their faces as they approached the remnants of what had once been the family's proud estate. Evelyn was the first to reach her. She knelt beside Catherine, her arms wrapping around her in a gesture of comfort that was both tender and futile. She didn't say anything, just held her, her own tears brimming as she took in the devastation surrounding them. Catherine clung to her, the gravity of her circumstances pressing down on her like a weight too heavy to bear. Richard stood a few steps away, his face drawn and lined with years of stress. His gaze remained fixed on the repossession notice nailed to the door. His expression betrayed a mix of anger, disappointment, and quiet resignation. He had always been the family's rock, but now he looked like a man eroded by the very foundation he had worked to uphold. "James," Richard muttered bitterly, his voice tinged with disbelief. How could he let this happen? The words hung in the air like an accusation, aimed as much at himself as at his absent son. Evelyn sniffled, her arms still wrapped around Catherine before looking up at her husband. "We need to find James. We need answers," she said, her voice shaky with a mixture of fear and anger. Richard nodded grimly, pulling out his phone. He dialed James's number, his hand trembling slightly as he stared at the repossession notice. The phone rang and rang, the sound echoing like a countdown to the end of everything. But once again, there was no answer. The phone buzzed in my hand, and I glanced at the screen. Evelyn. The name alone stirred something bitter in me, but I answered, curious to hear what she could possibly want after all this time. "Andrew." Her voice came through, trembling and laced with desperation. "I need your help. James is missing. The bank has taken everything. And I don't know what's happening. He's not answering his phone and—" Her voice broke, the weight of her panic spilling through every word. I let the silence stretch, savoring the shift in power. Then I spoke, my tone cold and cutting. "You really think I care?" I asked, the words slicing through the air like a blade. "You think I give a damn about your golden boy or about our so-called family, who only saw me when it was convenient for them?" Her sharp intake of breath was audible, and I could picture her scrambling to find the right words. For once, she didn't have the upper hand. "Andrew, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We've lost everything. And you've taken everything from us." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Taken everything," I repeated, my voice rising with anger. "No, Evelyn. You lost everything the day you decided I didn't matter. The day you chose James over me. The day you all betrayed me." I couldn't stop the words pouring out, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. "Do you even understand what that did to me? You and James. Both of you. Not once did you care. I walked away, disappeared from your lives, and not one of you stopped to ask why. Not one of you wondered if I was dead or alive. You didn't care." Her silence was telling, but it only fueled my rage. "You were too busy worshiping James," I spat, "my perfect, faultless son. And what did he do with your devotion? He tore me apart, piece by piece. He stole my wife, my life, everything I had worked for. And you just stood there. You didn't say a word. You let it happen." I could hear her breath hitch, the faint sound of a stifled sob. "Good. Let her feel it. Just a fraction of the pain I'd carried for years. You didn't even try, Evelyn," I said, my voice lowering, but no less venomous. "You watched me walk away, and you never looked back. I was nothing to you." The silence on the line was heavy, but I wasn't finished. "And now," I continued, my tone sharp and unforgiving, "your perfect little world is falling apart, and you want me to fix it. Your house, your money, your precious life. It's all gone because of the son you chose to put on a pedestal. The same son who destroyed me. And now he's destroyed you too. Andrew, please." Her voice was barely a whisper, shaky and broken. "Don't." I snapped, cutting her off. Don't beg me. Don't pretend now that you care. Where was this desperation when I needed you? When I was drowning? You didn't care then. And you don't care now. You just want me to save you from the mess you created. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. But guess what? I don't need you. Not anymore. While you were busy pretending everything was fine, I was out there rebuilding my life from the ashes of what you all destroyed. Brick by brick, I built something better. And now I get to watch it all come crashing down around you. Andrew, we're family, she said, her voice trembling with raw emotion. Please don't do this. Family. I repeated, the word dripping with disdain. You and Dad destroyed that a long time ago. You want someone to fix this. Call your golden boy. Let James clean up the mess he made. He's all you've ever cared about anyway. There was a long silence on the line. I imagined her standing there, clutching the phone, pale and desperate. The image should have softened me, but it didn't. It was too little, too late. Good luck, Evelyn, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You're going to need it. I ended the call without waiting for her response. The silence that followed was deafening, but I welcomed it. For the first time in years, I felt like I had said everything that needed to be said. There was no going back. No redemption. Not for her, not for them. A week later, the news came. James was dead. Word traveled fast, as it always does, with tragedies like his, but the details were as bleak as they were predictable. They found him out in the desert, sprawled face down on the cracked, sun-scorched earth, alone. Somehow, it felt fitting. A man who had spent his entire life basking in everyone else's admiration, only to discover that when the applause stopped, no one was left to stand by his side. Next to him was an empty bottle, its label faded and peeling under the relentless desert sun. The coroner called it an overdose, a tragic end to a tragic life, they said. But I knew better. James didn't stumble into tragedy. He embraced it, toyed with it until it finally consumed him. Why was he out there, so far removed from everything and everyone? Running, searching, trying to outrun the weight of his failures. I didn't know, but I could imagine it. The panic setting in as he realized the world had moved on. No savior was coming. No one cared anymore. The pedestal he had clung to for so long was gone. And with it, the illusion of his invincibility. Meanwhile, back home, the unraveling of my parents was as inevitable as it was poetic. The once magnificent house they'd so proudly flaunted was gone, replaced by a dilapidated shell on the outskirts of town. I saw it once, driving by out of morbid curiosity. Broken windows boarded up with warped plywood, grass devouring what used to be a manicured lawn, the paint peeling off walls that could barely hold themselves upright. It wasn't just a house. It was a reflection of their pride, shattered, abandoned, and decaying under the weight of their arrogance. I didn't stop the car, but as I passed, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. They'd held on to their illusion of superiority for so long, betting everything on James, and now it was all gone, just like him. They'd placed their faith in a lie, and when it fell apart, they were left with nothing but memories of their delusions. And then, there was Catherine, the woman who once ruled James's world with a dazzling smile and a look that could silence a room. Now she worked in a seedy bar on the edge of town, pouring drinks for men who didn't even pretend to respect her. One night, I decided to see for myself. I sat in the corner, unnoticed, watching her. The years hadn't been kind to her. The glow she once wore like armor was gone, replaced by a tired, worn expression that couldn't hide the weight of defeat. The men jeered at her, made crass jokes, and laughed at her expense. And she took it. She smiled, played along because what else could she do? This bar, with its dim lighting and stale beer, was her life now. A far cry from the luxury she had once flaunted as James's wife. It should have been sad, almost, but I couldn't forget the way she used to look at me, like I was beneath her. I remembered her disdain, her laughter when I walked away, convinced I'd never succeed without their approval. Now look at her. Look at all of them. James is dead. My parents are prisoners of their own failures. And Catherine, she's a shadow of who she once was, clinging to scraps in a world that couldn't care less. And me. I'm still here, stronger, unshackled from their judgment and betrayal. They thought they could destroy me, but all they did was sharpen my resolve. Watching their downfall isn't vengeance, it's balance. Catherine must have thought there was still hope, that some miracle might lift her out of the wreckage. But hope didn't live in that bar. It died there, night after night, as she endured the sneers and mocking laughter of men who saw her as nothing more than a faded relic. She endured because she had no choice. There was nowhere else for her to go. The life she once boasted about was gone, and with it, her illusions of untouchable privilege. I wondered if she ever thought about the past, if she realized the pedestal she'd stood on was built on the backs of people like me. When it came to the kids, there was no contest. I filed for custody, and the judge barely needed convincing. Catherine had no stable home, no real income, and no ability to provide for them. All she had to offer was chaos. The court saw it as clearly as I did. And the kids, they were relieved. They'd seen what I went through for them, how hard I fought to give them a better life. They didn't expect me to be perfect. They just needed someone who genuinely cared. When they moved in, I made sure they felt it. My home became theirs, a place where they were safe and valued. I didn't spoil them to win their affection. I gave them what they'd been denied for so long: stability, respect, and love. Slowly, they began to heal. Their laughter came easier, their confidence grew. They joined clubs, picked up hobbies, and started dreaming again. Watching them thrive was all the validation I needed. In the end, I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking justice. And I got it. Looking back, I won't deny that I was angry. Angry at Catherine, at James, at my parents for everything they had done, for the chaos they caused. But that anger didn't consume me anymore. It wasn't the thing driving me forward. My focus had shifted to the future, on my kids, on creating the stability and love they had been missing for so long. Catherine might have lost everything, but I gained something far more valuable than wealth or status: the opportunity to give my children a life where they felt safe, loved, and hopeful. That was all that mattered to me in the end. Catherine had always been headstrong, always carried herself like the world owed her something. Even when her life fell apart, that fire in her didn't die. It just burned her more than anyone else. I'd heard about her working in a rundown bar, scraping by on tips. Sometimes I almost pitied her, almost. But her choices had led her there, and I had no intention of letting her chaos pull me back into her orbit. One afternoon, Marina and I were at our favorite little cafe downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just a cozy place where we could escape the noise of the world for a while. I remember her laughter that day, bright and carefree, the kind that makes everything else fade away. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe, like I had truly left all the bitterness and hurt behind. And then I saw Catherine. She was across the street, and before I could even process the look in her eyes, she was storming toward us. Her heels clicked against the pavement like a countdown, and the tension in her every step was palpable. The anger etched on her face was unmistakable. Her eyes locked onto me with a mix of rage and desperation. "Andrew," she shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut through the soft hum of the cafe. Heads turned, and for a moment, the whole place seemed to freeze. "How dare you move on like this? You think you can just forget everything. Forget me. Forget your family." I set my coffee down, meeting her gaze with a calm I didn't entirely feel. "Catherine," I said evenly, keeping my tone steady, "this isn't the place for this. I've moved on. You should too." But she wasn't looking for reason. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" She spat, her voice climbing. "You took everything from me. Everything. Her hands trembled as she stepped closer, her face contorted with fury. I felt Marina shift beside me, her posture stiffening as she prepared for whatever might happen next. Before I could respond, Catherine lunged at me, her hand raised, aiming for a slap. She didn't get the chance. Marina was on her feet in an instant, stepping between us with a calm precision that was as protective as it was commanding. "That's enough," Marina said firmly, her voice low and controlled, like steel wrapped in silk. "You don't get to do this." Catherine froze mid-motion, her hands still hovering, stunned by Marina's intervention. But it didn't last. Her lips twisted into a sneer as she glared at Marina. "Who do you think you are?" she hissed. "You don't know anything about us, about him, about what he's done." Marina didn't flinch. "I know enough," she replied, her voice steady and unwavering. "I know he's moved on. And you should too. Whatever you're looking for, Catherine, you won't find it here." The venom in Catherine's eyes deepened, and she lunged again, this time aiming to shove Marina. It was a mistake. In one fluid motion, Marina sidestepped and caught Catherine's wrist. Before anyone could process what had happened, Catherine was on the ground, her arm pinned behind her back. Marina's movements were precise, practiced. She wasn't reacting. She was protecting. The cafe erupted into gasps and murmurs as Marina held Catherine firmly but without unnecessary force. "I'm showing you mercy," Marina said, her tone calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Don't make me regret it." Catherine stopped struggling, her anger giving way to shock and pain. When Marina released her, she staggered to her feet, clutching her wrist and glaring at Marina with a mix of humiliation and fury. Without another word, she turned and stumbled away, her pride more bruised than her body. I exhaled slowly, rising to my feet. "You didn't have to do that," I said softly, though I couldn't hide the admiration in my tone. "Yes, I did," Marina replied, her eyes meeting mine. "No one threatens you. Not her, not anyone." But Catherine wasn't done. She marched straight to the police station, spinning a tale about being attacked without provocation. She played the sufferer, her tears painting a picture of a defenseless woman wronged by someone out of control. She demanded justice, clinging to the belief that she could regain some semblance of power through the legal system. Catherine's story fell apart the moment the cafe's security footage came into play. The video painted an undeniable picture. Catherine storming toward me, her anger escalating until she tried to strike, and then turning her fury on Marina. The recording showed Marina's actions as calm, calculated, and entirely in self-defense, a sharp contrast to Catherine's reckless aggression. When the case reached court, the judge watched the evidence with an unwavering gaze. Their voice was stern as they addressed Catherine. "The video is clear," the judge stated. "You were the aggressor in this incident. Marina's actions were not only justified but measured under the circumstances. This case is dismissed." The sharp crack of the gavel silenced the courtroom, the finality echoing in the hushed air. The judge's expression hardened as they turned their attention back to Catherine. "Miss Catherine Lewis," they began, their voice heavy with reproach. "Your conduct has been nothing short of disgraceful. The evidence doesn't support your claims of victimhood. Instead, it reveals a troubling pattern of hostility and vindictiveness. This is not the behavior of someone seeking justice. It is the behavior of someone intent on causing damage." Catherine flinched, her confidence crumbling under the weight of the judge's words. "Let me be clear," the judge continued. "Any further attempts to contact or confront Mr. Andrew Carter, his fiancée Marina, or their children will not be tolerated. You are hereby ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from them at all times. This restraining order is effective immediately and will remain in place indefinitely. Any violation will result in severe legal consequences." The courtroom was still except for the rhythmic tapping of the stenographer's keys. Catherine's cheeks burned as she stared down at the floor, the murmurs of the onlookers adding to her humiliation. Every eye in the room seemed to pierce her, each gaze a reflection of her disgrace. For the first time, the full reality of her choices weighed on her. Once admired and envied, Catherine had fallen far from the pedestal she once occupied. Now, stripped of her dignity, she sat exposed for all to see, a woman whose bitterness had consumed her. Her attempts to disrupt my life and cling to the past had only highlighted her descent. The gavel struck again, ending the hearing. Catherine rose from her seat, her movements slow and deliberate, as though each step carried the weight of her shame. She avoided eye contact with anyone as she exited the courtroom, her head bowed, her pride in tatters. For the first time, the consequences of her actions seemed to fully register. She was alone, isolated by her own choices, with no one left to blame but herself. Marina, meanwhile, stood tall and composed, her name cleared and her integrity intact. As we walked out of the courtroom together, I placed my arm around her shoulders. "That was a lot," I said, exhaling the tension that had lingered through the proceedings. Marina smiled softly, her confidence as steady as ever. "She needed to learn that actions have consequences," she replied. Marina's steadfast presence had become the anchor in my life. When we exchanged vows in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends and family, it felt like the culmination of everything we had fought for: love, healing, and renewal. For me, it wasn't just about starting a new chapter. It was about building a life on my own terms, free from the chaos of the past. Marina embraced her role in our family wholeheartedly. With her background in martial arts, she began teaching the kids not just self-defense, but also discipline, confidence, and resilience. What started as casual lessons quickly turned into a cherished routine. She taught them far more than physical skills. She instilled in them values of integrity, perseverance, and kindness. Under her guidance, the kids began to thrive. Their laughter grew louder, their spirits lighter, and their dreams bolder. Marina's influence became a cornerstone of their growth, helping them rebuild their sense of self and purpose. Watching them flourish filled me with a deep gratitude I could hardly put into words. For the first time in years, my life felt whole, filled with love, stability, and the promise of a brighter future. Together, Marina and I created a home where the kids felt safe and cherished, a stark contrast to the turbulence they had endured before. Catherine, on the other hand, faded into the shadows of her own making. The once vibrant woman who had thrived on attention and admiration was now consumed by regret and loneliness. Isolated and bitter, she watched from afar as my family and I moved forward, our happiness a painful reminder of everything she had lost. Each decision she had made, every bridge she had burned, had led her further into solitude. Sitting alone in her small apartment, she was no longer the center of anyone's world, no longer admired, envied, or relevant. But I didn't dwell on Catherine's fate. I refused to let the past define me. With Marina by my side, I focused on building a life rooted in love, resilience, and joy. Together, we became partners in every sense, shaping a family and a future that reflected the strength we had found through adversity. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And that was the real victory. The past, with all its betrayals, heartbreak, and lessons, feels like a distant storm now. A storm that once battered me relentlessly, but ultimately passed, leaving the skies clear and calm. The scars remain, of course. They always do. But instead of bitterness, they carry a quiet strength, a testament to what I've endured and what I've built from the ashes. In my workshop, surrounded by the tools of my trade, the hum of creativity fills the air. It's a comforting sound, one that reminds me of who I am. A builder, a creator, a survivor. Across the room, Marina is laughing, her voice light and joyous as the kids animatedly recount their day. The sight makes me pause, a warm sense of contentment washing over me. This is my life now, simple, authentic, and full of love. The echoes of Catherine, James, and my family's betrayal still linger faintly like distant thunder, but they no longer carry the power to haunt me. They're simply reminders, markers of a past that shaped me but no longer defines me. I used to think revenge would heal me, that seeing their downfall would bring me peace. But the truth is, my peace didn't come from their failures. It came from letting go. It came from building something new, something entirely mine. Marina, with her steadfast strength and unwavering love, has become the cornerstone of this new life. She doesn't just stand beside me. She stands with me, lifting me up, grounding me when the world feels unsteady. And the kids, they've flourished. Their laughter is louder, their smiles brighter, their dreams bolder. Together, we've created a home where they feel safe, valued, and loved. A stark contrast to the turbulence they once knew. As I watch them, I realize the greatest victory isn't in seeing those who wronged me falter. It's in knowing I've created a life they could never take away. A life rooted in love, resilience, and hope. This is the legacy I'm leaving, not one of bitterness or revenge, but one of growth, strength, and unwavering truth. And so I live, not just surviving but thriving with Marina and the kids by my side. We've built a sanctuary, a place where the past holds no power and the future is bright with promise. For the first time in years, I feel whole. And in this quiet contentment, I find the true meaning of freedom. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care,